Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Lender Power BI user group, the virtual one. And this is the special time of the year for me. I get really excited, and and it's amazing. It's like a thank you, Chris, and because Chris nicely started our user group 5 years ago, and since then I kind of force him, or he's kindly accepts my request, and he comes back and he speaks in our user group every May. So it is like a tradition, and I'm really happy. And I'm so happy to see how long it has been, and how many new presenters we have, and these returning presenters, and new organizer as well in the group. So it's all going really well. I'm excited, and I'll stop talking. Today, we have Chris Webb again, and he's going to talk about using Excel as reporting and analysis tool for Power BI data. I know quite a few people within my organization are very excited to learn more about this, and there's plenty more who are also really want to know about it. And so just a few things. Chris likes questions to leave till the end, so please use chat window to have the conversations, or if you have any questions, please use the chat window. If you don't have access to the chat window, at the end, you could unmute or raise your hand, then you could ask your questions. And we will be recording the session, and we will be providing the slides if there are any slides or any reference material. We'll post the video and the slides and all those things on the YouTube. And yeah, that's pretty much it is. Thank you so much. And please mute yourself during the session. And that's all. Over to you, Chris.
Cool. All right, let me start with my slides. There won't be very many slides because this is a very demo heavy session. There we go. Where are my? Come on, let me try that again. There we are. There's my slides. That looks good. So yeah, we will start off with a couple of slides, and then it'll be mostly demos, and then I promise questions at the end. Okay, so let me introduce myself. My name's Chris Webb. I work at Microsoft on the Power BI Customer Advisory team. You can read my blog and follow me on Twitter based on the links on here. But I am a big Power BI fan. I always have been. And now I have the pleasure of talking to you today about something that I am particularly excited about. Normally I present about things like Power Query and stuff, but using Excel as a front end for Power BI data is something that I've always loved back since I was, an analysis services developer or a Power Pivot user back in the day. And what I was talking about is using Excel as a way of building reports. Now, before we carry on, it's going to be important to understand what I'm not going to be talking about as well. And what I am not going to be talking about is export to Excel. So there will be no export to Excel whatsoever in this session. And if I'm not exporting to Excel, what am I doing with Excel and Power BI? Well, as some of you, I'm sure, know, it's possible to link Power BI and Excel together. You can have your data set sitting in the Power BI service. You can have Excel sitting on your desktop, and you can build reports in Excel that use and consume and get data dynamically from your Power BI data set in the same way that a regular Power BI report does, in the same way that a paginated report does. So we are not talking about going to Power BI, exporting data and loading it into Excel in the normal way. We are talking about keeping your data in your Power BI dataset and using Excel as a front end for it, in the same way that a Power BI report or a paginated report can kind of query a Power BI dataset and get data and build reports that way. Okay. Before we get on to the how you do this part, I just wanted to have a little bit of discussion. because if we're talking about using Power BI as a kind of front-end tool for, Excel as a front-end tool for Power BI, there are two questions. First of all, if I'm an Excel user, why do I want to keep my data in Power BI? And secondly, if I'm a Power BI user, why would I want to use Excel to build reports? So let's talk about the first question. So if I'm an Excel user, what are the advantages of using Power BI? Now, I would imagine everybody here is a very keen, strong Power BI enthusiast. So this is going to be a really easy question to ask. You know, we all know the problems and the pain of building a reporting solution in Excel in the traditional way. You know, somebody, probably, you know, a business analyst, they've been hired to analyze data, and in actual fact, their entire life involves going to work, going to some web-based portal or some application, pressing the export to Excel button, downloading a CSV file, getting it into Excel, do some copying and pasting, do some formulas, do some manual changing of stuff, realizing that everything's broken, go back to the beginning, and that's their entire life. They don't actually analyze any data. All they're doing is these horrible manual processes to get data into somebody's Excel-based report template. And not only is this boring and painful, it breaks easily. You know, when somebody goes away on holiday or leaves the company, the whole process breaks down because it's very manual. And also because it's very manual, it's very error prone. And when different people do the same thing, they build their own reports, you end up with multiple versions of the truth and you get Excel hell. And of course, there are other problems with using Excel in the kind of traditional way for reports. It just can't handle the data volumes that Power BI can. It can't do the calculations as efficiently, and it can't aggregate data on large amounts of data either. So, you know, it's a pretty easy thing to say that, you know, the traditional way of building reports in Excel is a bad thing. But that doesn't mean that Excel as a way of building reports on top of Power BI data is bad. So let's go on to the second question. If I am a Power BI enthusiast, if I use Power BI for everything, why should I use Excel to build reports on top of my Power BI data? What's the point of it? Well, the first thing that I would say is that in a true kind of self-service Power BI deployment, it's not only the Power BI enthusiasts who will be building reports. It's the ordinary, regular, everyday people, you know, not only business analysts, but managers and so on. And there is always a certain kind of educational issue with using or learning Power BI. You've got to learn it. It's something new. Whereas if you can educate your users to use Excel with Power BI, the educational barrier to overcome is usually a lot less. Because Excel is the tool that everybody knows. My kids, they learned how to use Excel when they were 8 or 9 at primary school. Everybody knows how to use Excel. Everybody's got Excel on their desktop. So if you can show them how they can link Excel up to their Power BI data, you get the best of both worlds. You get an end to all of those manual processes. You get everybody working with the same data that gets refreshed at the same time. But then, you know, if you want to build a specific chart that you only really know how to build in Excel, you're using Excel, so you can still build that chart. You know, we all know that DAX is hard. And what happens if an end user wants to be able to do a certain complex calculation on their data? Well, they can learn some DAX, but that's quite a big roadblock. Whereas if they can get their data into Excel, then the chances are they can use Excel formulas to do the calculation that they want. So I would say that, you know, for a lot of people, Excel is an easier tool for building reports on top of your Power BI data. But even for somebody who is really, really good at Power BI, I would say that there are specific use cases which are really important and really good that Excel excels in. First of all, pivot tables. Now, most of the time when you build a Power BI report, you know the question you're trying to answer. But in some cases, all your users want to be able to do is just explore the data in your data set. Now, if I had £1 for every time I saw somebody try to build a Power BI report that acted like a pivot table, I would be extremely rich indeed. And my opinion is that if you want a pivot table, rather than trying to recreate it in Power BI using a matrix or the visual personalization feature or whatever, just give your users a pivot table, because Excel pivot tables, as we'll see in a moment, can link directly up to your data in Power BI. And Excel pivot tables are great for exploring data. If you don't know the questions you're going to ask, you want to just drag and drop and see what's there, pivot tables are great. So for data exploration scenarios, use Excel pivot tables. But there are other things as well. There are certain types of report that it turns out it's reasonably hard to build inside Power BI. Financial style reports, in particular, the kind of layouts that people want with financial style reports can be quite difficult to build in Power BI. It is possible. There are blog posts showing it. There are custom visuals that will give you kind of financial style report layouts. But part of the reason why financial reports look the way they are is because people have been building them in Excel for years and years and years. Somebody needs to mute themselves. Thank you. And if that's the way that financial reports look, then, well, you can still build them in Excel, but using a Power BI dataset. So we'll see a little bit of that in a moment, especially when we come to looking at cube formulas. All right. One last thing to mention. So we're now going to go on to the demos, and we are going to see how you can connect Excel up to Power BI data. There are two ways of doing this, and I see that I've failed to upload the slide, even though I know it's out of date. You can, from the Power BI portal, download a whole Excel workbook connected to Power BI in a couple of different ways, or you can start in Excel and connect that way. So let me stop presenting my slides and let me present my desktop. And let's see how we can do all of this. So let me present my screen. Let me appear here. All right, so here we are in the Power BI portal. And let's have a look at the different ways that we can get a connection from our Power BI dataset to Excel. Now, like I said, the first thing we can do is start in the Power BI service. And what I've got here is the Power BI Datasets Hub. This was added a couple of months ago. And this is your one-stop shop showing you a list of all of the datasets that you've got access to. Here is a dataset that I want to use. I'm going to click on it. And it gives you a nice page where you can go away and build a report from scratch. You can also click Analyze in Excel. And when I do this, it will download an Excel workbook with a connection already made to this dataset. I can do this in a number of other ways. There's an Analyze in Excel option up here. But if I go to the workspace where this dataset lives, I can click on the workspace, on the dataset, and click Analyze in Excel from here. So this Analyze in Excel option appears in a number of different places. It does the same thing. Let's finally click it. I'm going to click it. I'm going to download my file, which I can now open. This will open up the Excel workbook that's being downloaded. In a moment, there we are. And I need to enable editing and enable content. And you can see here we've got a new Excel workbook. It's got a blank pivot table in it. And in a moment, the pivot table will wake up and you can see all of the measures and fields on here. And I can now just take that and I can drag and drop things into here. This is Excel on my desktop. And every time I interact with the pivot table, a new query goes back to my dataset. So no data has been downloaded to my Excel workbook except what you see in the pivot table. And every time the pivot table updates, new data is got from my dataset. So when the data in my dataset changes, the data shown in my pivot table will also change. Now, my opinion is that if you want to link Excel up to Power BI, you probably don't want to start in the Power BI portal. Instead, what you want to be able to do is start from Excel. So here is a new empty Excel workbook that I happen to have standing by. And let's see how we can link an Excel workbook that I've just created on my desktop up to Power BI. Well, there are a couple of different ways of doing this. First of all, I can go to the Data tab, click on Get Data, and you will see that there is a From Power BI option on here. And I can click this and link up a pivot table. Another way of doing things, and this may not be available in the version of Excel that you've got. I work for Microsoft. I get really bleeding edge versions of all of the Office products to play with. But coming soon, if you don't have it already, is if you go to Insert Pivot Table, you'll see there is a From Power BI option here as well. So let's click this. This does the same thing as the option I just showed you on the Get Data menu. When I click on it, a new pane appears on the right-hand side called Power BI Datasets, showing me a list of all of the datasets that I've got access to. At Microsoft, we have a lot of datasets, so this takes quite a long time. And if I search for price paid, there is the dataset that I want to connect to. And I click on that. And again, it will create a new pivot table with a connection up to the dataset in Power BI. So these are the two different ways that I can connect Excel up to my Power BI dataset. Now, let's see what we can do in Excel now we've got a connection. We've got a pivot table here. Pivot tables, people know how to use pivot tables. There are a few things to point out that are different for pivot tables connected to a Power BI dataset. It is worth mentioning that all of the functionality that I show you here with pivot tables is actually really, really old functionality. It's functionality that's been around in Excel for many, many years, and it predates Power BI. The reason Excel pivot tables can connect to Power BI in the way that they do is because a long time ago, Excel pivot tables were built so that they could connect up to SQL Server Analysis Services. They were then updated so that they could connect to Power Pivot, the Excel data model. And now, because Power BI's engine is basically the same engine that powers Power Pivot and analysis services, Excel pivot tables will also connect up to Power BI datasets. But first thing to point out, in the Power BI dataset that I've connected to, I've got two measures: average price paid and count of sales. They appear up here in the pivot table field list in a separate section. This is actually something that I believe is going to change in the medium term in a few months. I actually kind of like seeing my measures up in a separate area up here, but moving forward, they will appear on the table that they are connected with. But I can drag average price paid and count of sales onto here. Let's zoom in a little bit. I can drag something like month name onto rows. The data I'm using here is, by the way, land registry price paid data. So it's real estate property transaction data for the UK. Doesn't really matter too much what the data is, though. I can drag fields into the filter area like this, and I can filter my data. Remember, every time I interact, a new query is going back to my data set to get the data. And I can also create slicers. So I can right click, add county as a slicer. And if I want to see the average price paid for freehold properties, that ownership type F, in Buckinghamshire, where I live, I can see that here. All right. So I've got a pivot table. It works in the same way that everybody knows pivot tables do. Like I said, there are a few extra things that you get. We've got a timeline slicer. This will work with any date fields that I've got inside my data set. Personally, I'm not a big fan of timelines, but they can be quite useful in some cases. But it will allow me to filter my data in maybe a slightly different way. There we go. Let's remove that filter and remove the slicer. I've also got some functionality which is hidden away up here on the Pivot Table Analyze tab. So moving on to something that I think is really, really useful. Notice up here this Fields, Items and Sets button. This only appears when you've got a pivot table connected up to either Power BI or Analysis Services or Power Pivot. Let's see what it does. We've got options here to create sets based on rows and columns. A set is just simply a predefined selection of things. So if you were to have a pivot table where, multiple pivot tables and multiple sheets where you wanted perhaps what you had on rows to always be the same, you could set that up, create a set, and then reuse that selection across multiple pivot tables. So sets are a way of creating a predefined selection that you can reuse in multiple places. Maybe more importantly, sets allow you to create predefined combinations of things. Now, why is this useful? If we think about financial reports, let's click on our pivot table. Let's move month name up to columns, and maybe let's put property type name on rows. And let's move my values down here. What I've got is two measures, average price paid and count of sales, and my 12 months and all of the grand totals. If you're thinking about a financial report, sometimes what you need is a specific selection of columns or rows where you've got combinations of different things. Now, what do I mean? Well, let's imagine that we wanted to create a pivot table where we showed the average price paid for all of the 12 months we've got here, but only show count of sales for December and no grand totals whatsoever. We can't actually do things like that easily in Power BI using a matrix, but with fields, items, and sets here in Excel, we can. So let's show you how this works. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a set based on columns. Let's give it a name. My columns. What we see here is all of the columns we've got, every combination of month and measure. And what I can do here is I can go in and delete all of the combinations that I'm not interested in and leave only the combinations that I am interested in. So I'm deleting every single month count of sales until I get to the bottom. Let's delete October and November count of sales, but leave December's count of sales in here, and let's delete the grand totals here. You'll see that I've got the option to add rows, copy rows, move things up and down. But at this point, I'm just going to click OK. Might take a little bit of a few seconds to crunch that new selection and test that it's valid. But what you'll see when I've done this, when it comes back, in a moment, there we go, is I've got a pivot table showing average price paid for every month, except for December, where I've also got count of sales, which is really quite handy, I think. Other useful things that we can do with pivot tables connected up to Power BI. Well, I've got one pivot table here, and it's connected to this slicer. Now, pivot table filters can only ever filter one pivot table. But if you're building a report, it's quite likely that you want to have multiple pivot tables and perhaps multiple pivot charts all on the same page all linked together using a single slicer. And you can do that. So let's move over here. Let's leave our pivot table here, and let's insert a new pivot table. So let's go to insert a pivot table from an external data source. I'm just going to use the connection that I've already got up here. So it's important that it uses the same connection. Otherwise, I won't be able to do the trick that I'm going to do now. So this is going to create a second pivot table on the sheet connected to Power BI. Let's put count of sales in here, and let's put something like new, which tells me what is old or new. Now, at the moment, this slicer that I've got up here only filters this pivot table. If I click on this slicer and I go to port connections, I can tick the box so that this slicer is linked to both of the pivot tables on here. And now when I change to filter by Bridgend, or indeed Buckinghamshire again, or Caerphilly, you can see that both pivot tables can be controlled from a single slicer, which is really, really important when you're building reports. Okay, so those are pivot tables. Pivot tables, like I said, are really useful as a way of exploring data. And yes, you can make pivot tables look beautiful. You can take a pivot table and apply a format to it and so on. But, you know, pivot tables, they always look like pivot tables, don't they? And that's not always going to give you the kind of layout that you really want. You know, it would be much better if you could just have, you know, regular Excel cells with data in, because then you've got complete control over the formatting. The other problem with pivot tables is that they have this tendency to grow and shrink, and then they grow and shrink over other stuff you're doing, which makes, you know, laying out a report really awkward. Now, what I've seen a lot of people do in this situation is have a pivot table on a hidden sheet and then use things like VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP or get pivot data formulas to get the data they want from their pivot table onto another sheet where they can get the layout they need and to make everything look very, very pretty. But there's a better way of doing it, because there is a second way that we can get data from our Power BI dataset into cells in Excel. How can we do this? Well, let's create a new sheet here and let's create a new pivot table. What we can use are something called Excel cube formulas. Excel cube formulas, again, are very old functionality. They've been around for 15 years. That's something that worked for Power BI, worked for analysis services in the past, works for Power BI now. It's one of the best kept secrets, I think, in Excel. And it's the key to getting really, really good, highly formatted layouts in Excel when you're connected to Power BI data. Now, the question is, if I'm talking about this new way of getting data, what am I doing with a pivot table? Well, the answer is the easiest way to get going with Excel cube formulas is not to start typing formulas in a cell. It is, in fact, to start with a pivot table, get the layout that you want, and then explode the pivot table. Now, that sounds very dramatic, but I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to build a really super simple pivot table here. It will have a filter on it. And let's put a slicer on it this time. Let's put month as a slicer. So here's my pivot table. This is roughly the layout of the report that I want. Slicer slices the data as you would expect. But now if I click inside the pivot table, go to Pivot Table Analyze, OLAP Tools, and then use this Convert to Formulas option. Let's do, well, I'm going to click Convert up here. And when the magic happens, the pivot table is going to disappear. At this point, there is no more pivot table anymore. What we've got instead are cells with Excel formulas in. So I've clicked on A5 here. You can see up in the formula bar, there is a formula. Click on B6, there's another formula. The Excel cube formulas are a way of linking a single cell in your worksheet to a single value in the Power BI service. But they're regular Excel formulas. They're like any other Excel formula that you would use, and you type them up in the formula bar, you can write them yourself. Exploding a pivot table is simply a way of creating a large number of these formulas, but the key thing is that they are still linked to the data in your dataset. So when I change the slicer, or indeed I still change the pivot table filter, which is left over up here, then the data still changes, it still updates. And when the data changes in my data set, then the data in my report will change as well. What's so good about this? Well, these are still just Excel cells. So of course I can format them however I want. I can take this value, let's make it bold. I'm not particularly good at formatting in Excel, but I could maybe make it a little bit bigger. I could go to the format cells and put a border around here. Let's put a top border and a bottom border and make it fairly thick. And there we go. And I could even put in a background color if I wanted. Let's make this slightly gray. And you can see how now I can use all of Excel's regular formatting functionality to get the exact layout that I want. Similarly, for charting, pivot charts have got lots of options, but they don't do absolutely everything that Excel charts do. But now I've just got a range of data. I could select this and build a chart myself if I wanted. Now, there's more cool stuff we can do with this. These cells are linked to Power BI. If I just copy and paste in some random place, you can see that it all still works, no matter where I put these cells. So this is where we can start to do more interesting layouts. Let me just go back to where that was before. What are the kind of things we can do? Well, let's say that we want to add a new measure on here. Everything we've got here was created when I exploded the pivot table, but there are going to be some situations where we want to be able to write our own formulas. There are two main functions when we write Excel cube formulas. First one that I'll point out here is the cube member function. The cube member function gives you something, a field value that would have appeared on rows or columns in your pivot table. So if you want to get a measure or a value from a field in Power BI, cube member is what you're going to use. And there we've got cube member to get our rows. To get a value, the result of a measure, we use cube value. So cube value here, if I click on the formula and see where it references count of sales.
Sorry,
Chris, I think you've been muted. Yeah, you're able to unmute yourself, please.
All right. Can you hear me again?
Yeah, thanks.
Cool. All right. So yeah, cube value is the function that gets individual values that would have been in the body of the pivot table. So if we want to extend our report, we can just write some new formulas using these functions. So let me just show you how we could add a new measure onto here. Zoom in a bit. If I type cube member, first thing I need to supply is the connection, which should be, actually, it's probably that one. Let me just double check, because otherwise this demo isn't going to work. Accidentally created a new connection, but let's just go with that. A cube member, got this nice IntelliSense that shows us what we can type. And then I've got to write a member expression. The bad news is that because this is old functionality, I am not writing any DAX here. I am writing MDX, which is the older query language of analysis services, which you can still use to query Power BI, but it explains why what we're showing here isn't DAX syntax. But it's pretty easy to understand, and I can use the IntelliSense to get what I want. There's average price paid, and there is my measure. Of course, that's not enough, but these cells here that contain cube value functions, well, they're just Excel formulas. So what I can do now is just drag across, and because they're Excel formulas, I drag across, and now I've got all of the values for average price paid, which I think is pretty fun. We can do other cool stuff. So if I go up to G2 here, I can say cube member, and let's go to date. Actually, let's go to, should I have done up here? Let's go to property. Let's go to date actually. And let's go to month name and all and January. So there is January in a cell. Let me just delete this. And because I've deleted my slicer, I'm going to delete my slicer reference up here. And instead, let's link this to $G$2, which contains a month name. And let's just drag that over there and drag that over there. And now this is the count of sales and average price paid for January. If I type March up here in a cell, because this is just a regular Excel formula, I can dynamically generate this to, let's go to $G$1, hit enter, and now this is March. Let's type April, May, and you can see that we can have all kinds of fun with this. So that's Excel cube formulas. And I think Excel cube formulas are incredibly useful for building highly formatted reports, especially financial reports. But there is a third way that we can get our data into Excel. Let's create a new worksheet. Some of you may be aware of the new Excel data type options that appear up here on the data tab. So for example, to show you how these work that isn't in a way that isn't connected to Power BI at all, I could type a stock symbol up in here, MSFT, which is Microsoft, and I can tell Excel that this is a stock symbol, and I can click on this, and it will link it to some curated data from the cloud. I'm going to say that this is a NASDAQ stock symbol. And there we go. There's the Microsoft stock price. And I can now say B2 and get the 52-week high. I can say B2 and find the number of employees, all of this interesting information about Microsoft Corporation. So that's pretty cool, but this is just curated public data. What we can do now is do the same thing, but for Power BI data. Now, in order for this to work, there are some things that you've got to do in your Power BI dataset. So here is the dataset that I've built that I've been using for all of my demos. And what I've got here is a table called property type. So when the land registry records a property sale in the UK, it has a property type associated with it. And if we look at the data in the property type table, you can see that we've got detached, flat, semi-detached, terraced, and other as different property types. Now, on my dimension table, I not only have the property type name, but I also have a link to an image which will represent my property type, and I've got a description. I've got various other different fields. Now, in order to consume this data in these Excel data types, what I need to do is go to my property type table, and I need to flick the is featured table switch here. Set that to yes. I'll need to tell Power BI what the row label is and what the key column is. The key column is the thing that uniquely identifies each property type. And when I publish this with is featured table available, I can go to Excel and I can say, well, let's type detached or flat in these cells. And I can go up to here and I can see all of the data types that I've published up to Power BI. These are organizational data types. I'm going to convert these to property types. There'll be some disambiguation again, because again, when I've typed detached, did I mean detached or semi-detached? Well, I meant detached. And I can click on this. And when this comes back, it will tell me, come on, N. Actually, there we go. Come on. Select that. All right, that has decidedly not worked, which is fun. This might also explain why another demo later on that I want to do doesn't work yet, but it doesn't work today. But what this should do is link the value in my cell up to my Power BI data, and then I would be able to do things like get the data from, maybe this has worked actually, maybe it's just the, let's say B2, yeah, it has worked, that's good, it's just the icon has not appeared. And now I can get things like the description. I can get, and let's drag that down here. I can go in here, I can get measure values from that cell, from that table. So let's get the average price paid. And I can even get the image. Type image, and there is my property type image. Let's make that a bit bigger. Let's make that a bit bigger. We can do that. You can imagine that there is quite a lot of overlap here with what we can do with Excel cube functions. I would say that Excel data types are much easier to use than Excel cube functions, but they have very limited uses for anybody building serious reports. For Excel users who want to be able to do something really, really simple, assuming that you, the developer, the Power BI developer, give them something that is very simple. Yeah, the Excel data types, yeah, they can be useful in some cases for building really simple things. But for more complex reports, Excel cube functions, I think, are probably the way to go. OK, those are the three different ways that we can get data into Power BI. This is all, sorry, Excel data into Excel from Power BI. The next thing that I was going to show is the really, really exciting new functionality that we've got coming soon, which means that instead of all of this just working in Excel on the desktop, it also works in Excel in the browser. Now, this is something that you won't be able to do yet. This is something that I was able to do a couple of days ago, last time I checked these demos. But when I check them today, it's all stopped working because inside Microsoft, we use these dog food builds. But the really cool thing is that I should be able to save my Excel file to SharePoint or OneDrive for Business. I should be able to see my pivot tables, my cube functions, my Excel formulas, and what I should be able to get as well is a properly interactive and editable Excel workbook in the browser. Now, like I said, it's not working for me today because something has gone wrong and I'm not quite sure. Probably some developers have broken something, but you get the idea of what will be possible because here I am in Excel online in the browser and I can see my pivot table field list. And not only can I interact with slices and things, if I've got edit permissions, I'll be able to drag things into values and change my pivot table. But sadly, this isn't working today. Hopefully it comes working again. This will be rolling out and available for people in the real world over the next couple of months. And for me, the reason this is so exciting is that this will give us the opportunity to finally publish our Excel-based reports to a wider audience. In the past, just being able to build Excel reports on the desktop, it wasn't really great because if you wanted to share your report, you had to email around your Excel workbook. Now we can publish them up to SharePoint or OneDrive for Business, and people can view and collaborate there. They can also, of course, and again, this isn't going to work, publish their Excel workbooks up to a workspace, and we can see Excel reports inside a Power BI workspace in the same way we can see paginated reports or we can see regular Excel reports. I hate it when demos don't work properly, but there we are. Very last thing to say. How can I get hold of this? How is it licensed? Well, there are a couple of different factors to take into account. Different functionality that I've demoed here is of a different age. Pivot tables and cube formulas, as I've said, have been around for years and years. If you want pivot tables and cube formulas to work connected up to a Power BI dataset, you need Excel 2010 Service Pack 1 or later. And I'm pretty sure everybody should at least have Excel 2010. If you don't have Excel 2010, then I feel quite sorry for you. You may need to update some drivers, though, to make that work. And these can be downloaded from powerbi.com. The organizational Excel data types that I showed you, though, are much, much newer. They will need a Microsoft 365, what used to be an Office 365 subscription, and you need to be either on one of the commercial or one of the educational SKUs, so it won't work at home. And of course, when you've got Microsoft 365, your version of Excel updates automatically, and there are different speeds at which it can update. So organizational data types are available now if you've got current channel or monthly enterprise channel, but other versions of M365 Excel that update on a slower basis, you might not have these organizational data types yet. And of course, on the Power BI side, you need a Power BI Pro subscription, and you'll need build permissions on the underlying dataset in order to be able to build these reports. Okay, that brings me to the end of my session, and time to take some questions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. I've compiled all of the questions from the chat window, so if I can share my screen, then you should be able to see those a little bit easier. Just bear with me.
Cool.
I think actually you've probably answered the vast majority of them with that very last slide on licensing, to be fair. So most of these are questions and comments. Although Paul has got one I think you haven't answered yet. Has it now stopped using explicit measures, and can you use columns as with Power BI?
Oh, I forgot to mention that. Not yet, but that is coming later this year. So later this year, you will be able to drag and drop any field into the values area, and it will create an implicit measure for you, which I think will be really, really important.
Cool, thanks, Chris. I'm going to skip the licensing ones because you've just literally covered that. Paul also makes a comment about scalability and performance. He says, in our experience, Excel cube functions are not very scalable and can break if Power BI model or AS cube metadata changes, is deleted, etc. Great functionality, but be careful. So I guess that's a comment rather than a question.
Yes, exactly. That's a fair comment. Depending on how you build your Excel cube functions, you might end up with multiple MDX queries being generated in the background, and these are MDX queries which by definition will always run slightly slower than the equivalent DAX query. But if you're careful with them, yeah, you should be generally okay.
Thanks. Next one from Mihai. Mihai asks, is the activity showing up in the Power BI activity logs when you're creating these reports in Excel?
It should do, because these are just MDX queries being fired off against your data set. And if they don't show up today, remember, coming soon on the roadmap, we have the new Power BI integration with log analytics, which will be your new one-stop shop for absolutely all Power BI monitoring data. And I am pretty sure that the MDX queries will show up there as well.
Great, thanks, Chris. I think the next one's been answered. Christian comments that PBI data types are still limited in the current channel at the moment.
Yeah, and I would say they will still be quite limited. They will be added to and improved going forward, but it will be, I think, some time before we can use them for kind of serious reporting. Well, I say serious. I mean, I'm a big fan of Excel cube functions, but they've been around for years and nobody knows about them, nobody uses them. And part of the reason is that they are too hard to use for most users. One of the kind of design goals of the Excel organizational data types is that they are really super simple to use. And as a result, I think that kind of lowers the barrier of entry for regular Excel users.
Yeah, great. And then your colleague Alex has been taking great interest in your screen and noticed that you didn't have the Inquire tab enabled, and has helpfully linked that out for everybody.
I'm sorry, Alex.
And then Paul has another question. He says, with the Excel online data connectivity coming, will it support SQL, Azure AS and Azure AS data sources?
Not in the initial release, but never say never. But it will support Power Pivot if you're using Power Pivot. So that's something to put out there.
Okay, and then finally, I don't know who asked this one because the name's not showing up on Teams. Is it also a possibility to connect an Excel table to a Power BI dataset using a DAX expression?
It is, and I dropped that demo right at the end because we didn't have enough time given the time constraints. If I had another 10 minutes, I'd go into that. There are two ways of doing this. First of all, with an Excel pivot table, you can double click in a cell and that will drill down. That's the drill to detail functionality. What you can actually do then is edit that table, and you can edit and add your own DAX query to that table, and it will display the result of that DAX query. So that's a great way of building a DAX query into a table in Excel. The other thing that you can do is, if you've got Power BI Premium, that gives you XMLA endpoints, and XMLA endpoints make your Power BI dataset look like analysis services. And that means that you can then use Power Query in Excel to connect to your XMLA endpoint, build a query, get a table of data, and put that in a table. So that's something a bit more user-friendly for people who don't want to write DAX queries. The bad news is, in the background, that generates MDX queries, which can be slower. But again, if you're just getting a fairly simple table of data, that works okay.
Great, and I'm just copying a few more comments. I've not had a chance to read them myself yet, but let's pop them in. Steve's busy plugging his blog, so we'll skip that one. But there's some
that's not his blog
there in the chat. Yeah. Oh, they're not his blogs actually.
No,
are they?
No, but OLAP pivot table extensions in particular is really good. I love that tool, and I have that enabled here.
Cool. Sorry, Steve. And then, oh, that's a question for me. Yes, comments. I'm literally just using Snippet and pasting it into a PowerPoint presentation. Nothing fancy, but at least if I capture the questions here, they also come through on the video, so everybody gets to see them afterwards as well. And then Bettina asks, with the Excel connected to the Power BI dataset, can you subsequently disconnect the Excel from the data source and save with just the current values?
That's a good question. I don't know. I suspect not, but you could always just copy and paste the values out of the cells, out of the pivot table or whatever, and then do it that way if you wanted. I'd have to test, to be honest.
brilliant. I think. Oh, we have. Sorry, go on.
Yeah.
Have I missed one?
Yeah, there's a question from Chris Barber and Mihai. It's the same question. It's about Excel to Power BI data flows.
Oh, yeah. Do we have any way of connecting Excel to Power BI data flows?
No, but that is coming soon. That was announced at Embass a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's in a few months we'll be able to do that. And I know that was a massive request from a lot of people, but yes, you will be able to use Excel Power Query to connect to Power BI data flows and Power Platform data flows as well.
Cool. And there is one more question or a statement is row level security seems to be destroyed in Excel. Is that true? What do you think?
No, row level security will be respected, but you've got to remember that if you're looking at it and you're the person that's got owner permissions or on the data set, it should all just work okay.
And we had one raised hand, but I think that's gone down now.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's it, James.
Okay, well, brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much, Chris. Really great session, already great feedback appearing in the chat window. It's always interesting as well to see a Power BI session not about Power BI. It's great to see how the ecosystem extends beyond what we're used to as well. So thank you for that. As I mentioned at the start of the video, sorry, this session has been recorded and we will publish the video on our YouTube channel in the next day or so. I'll try and get that up there quickly. So if you missed anything, I want to go back and repeat any of Chris's demos, then hopefully you will be able to follow. There's a link at the bottom of the screen. I've also just noticed I've got those fancy options to put myself in the corner like Chris had. I'll not risk trying them now, but that's very exciting indeed. And if Chris's session today wasn't exciting enough for you this month, then as Prafi mentioned, May is our special anniversary month. I joined a couple of years ago, but Prafi has been here since the beginning, and it's now our 5th year of running the London Power BI user group. And to celebrate, we are hoping to plan an additional extra special session this month. It's not all 100% confirmed yet, so I'm being a bit brave by sharing the details, but I'm hoping Will can cancel his meeting and make the session. Amir has confirmed. So on the 27th, we have got a special London Power BI user group. It will be at 7 p.m. London time, and will feature Amir Netz. If you don't know Amir, he's the Power BI CTO and a technical fellow at Microsoft. He is the brains behind all things Azure Analysis Services. And we also have Will Thompson, who is a regular speaker at the London Power BI user group, who will be joining him. Will is the principal program manager who looks after the self-service experience in Power BI. Hopefully I've got that right. Chris can correct me if not.
I'm not sure what Will's job title is, but it's probably right.
What's with Power BI?
He definitely works with Power BI. He's the guy from the old Power BI YouTube videos. I think that's how we all know Chris with his famous not Chris, sorry, Will with his famous t-shirt. Yeah. So so watch out for more details on that. We will share them on our social media channels. We will be shouting about it the minute it's all confirmed. We'll get the session up on Meetup and announce it on LinkedIn and YouTube. So hopefully you'll get a notification when that comes about. So I think that's it. I think that's everything we've got for today. So again, big thank you to Chris, and I'm going to sound like a newsreader. It's bye from me and Prathi.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you all. So for the next session, bring your own pizza and beer. We'll bring
your own pizza and beer. Yes, I see what you mean. Yeah, sorry. Hopefully it won't be too long before we can get back to doing some in-person sessions as well.
Yeah.
Cool. Right. Thanks a lot then.
Thank you.
Cheers all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.